What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bound to Improve.
This is episode 21. My name is Chris Pound.
My name is Landon Eller.
Let's get right into it.
So the book we read last week was Multipliers by Liz Wiseman, and for an implementation, we're doing a couple episodes back to back here, so that will be in a later episode.
Yeah. The book that we read this week was 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene.
And this was a very long book, so we are going to break this out, do 17 strategies in this first episode, and then 16 in the second episode. The main summary of the book is just about how to be a strategic warrior in your daily life. Everyone faces a whole bunch of challenges, so how can you be emotionally balanced to make decisions and see when others are using certain tactics or strategies to kind of defeat you.
Yeah, this book talked about the strategies of war, and we're going to try to put a little twist on it and have more appeal to everyday life and how we can use the things that famous generals were using way back when and try to use those things today and see where life takes us, I suppose.
Yeah, so a couple of key traits were to judge people by their actions. Depend on your own arms. Everything can be taken from you but your own mind. So how can you strengthen and develop that? Worship Athena, not Ares. So this kind of story behind that here is Athena, which was a Greek goddess, battled with strategy versus Ares, who battled with brute force. You want to be more like Athena and use that grand strategy, which we'll get into. Elevate yourself above the battlefield. Be light on your seat. Be able to see the whole picture from the 10,000 foot view. And then spiritualize your warfare. You always have to be at war with yourself. Do not let the water get constant, which we'll get into that a little bit as well.
Yeah, this book was broken up into 5 different parts, and the first part being the self-directed warfare.
So the first strategy here was declare war on your enemies, or the polarity strategy. The primary purpose for this one was always have an enemy to use the launching pad, and this kind of goes back to Patrick Bet-David's book, where he was like, use your enemy's negative comments against you as rocket fuel.
Yeah.
It always gives you something to kind of compete against, in a sense. Always keeps you moving forward.
But you also have to keep in mind that when you're being attacked, it's a sign that you are important enough to target in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing something that other people are taking notice of, and it's almost like they feel like they're above you, so they need to attack you from beneath you in order to kind of bring you back down to level. But don't play at their level, right? You know where you're at, forget where everyone else is, keep your head clear, I guess.
Yeah, so I thought a good analogy that they use in this chapter, I thought, was kind of like the earth. The enemy is the ground beneath you. It has a gravity that holds you in place. Without an enemy to walk upon, you kind of lose your bearings and all sense of proportion. You don't have anybody to compete against to go after that next thing.
Yeah. But you always got to remind yourself that you have options, right? It's not a binary thing. You have more than just one outcome. So just keep in mind that the more options you have, the better alternative solutions that you can have as well.
Yeah. And moving on to the second strategy here, do not fight the last war. So what this was kind of getting into was you reach a certain point where like you don't want to be egged on by all your success where you think you can conquer anything. You have to be able to kind of define a stopping point. Your past successes are your biggest obstacles. You have to constantly be iterating, and you have to remove all of the ego.
Yeah, what most often weighs you down and brings you misery is the past, right? You have to force yourself to react to the present moments. But along with that, success makes us lazy and complacent. You always have to keep moving, otherwise you're going to be in that complacent mindset where enough is enough and I'm good enough where I'm at. It should never be like that. You should always be striving to maximize your own potential.
Yeah, and this is where I was talking about the water settling. So you have to think of the mind as a river. The faster it flows, it keeps up better with present and responsive change. You have to wage constant war on that water settling.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, it's easy to become complacent and lazy. Another thing, a couple more things I have here was you always have to be re-examining your beliefs and principles.
Yeah, sometimes you have to shake yourself and break free from the hold of your past.
Yeah.
Right. Like Marcus Aurelius said, life is like a river. When you throw a log into the river, what does it do? It goes downstream. It's past. It's gone. You have to be able to let go of the past because you cannot control the past. And as many reps as possible. Jason talked about how one of his life coaches made him draw 2 circles: things that he can control and things that he can't control. He filled both of them out. After looking at the things that he can't control, what did he do? He erased them. Because the more time you spend on things that you can't control, it's a lose-lose situation because you're trying to deal with things that you have zero control over. So just forget about them and only focus on the things that you can control, like the present moment.
Yeah.
Controlling your emotions, things like that.
The last thing I would add here is you have to absorb like what's going on at the present time and always be iterating, or basically you're gonna die. You have to be able to break up your routines in a different fashion, break up the monotony. For example, like in relationships, like if you're doing the same things and becoming complacent, that's when you start to
have
friction and that divide.
Yeah.
So how can you always kind of spice things up?
Be bold.
Well, I was kind of taking it more from the like, what can you do differently? Like, is it a date night every?
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Once a month, or is it you always are going to make breakfast together on Sundays or something like that? And one of the stories he told here was the Prussians, who were known for their military success, were going to war with Napoleon here, and they just stuck to their past ways of success. They marched in like a single file lines and just defeated them using brute force. But Napoleon had a different strategy. He was able to break up his forces and kind of attack them from a whole bunch of different angles, which led to the Prussians' defeat because they were so focused on their past success.
You have to have the ability to adapt, right? What has worked in the past may or may not work in the future, and you need to realize that early on. So being able to adapt means it may be a similar situation, but it's never the same situation that you're already in. So just keeping that in mind, you'll see, patterns and trends that you've seen before, but realize that those same patterns and trends aren't necessarily the same in that aspect, in that certain situation. So you have to be able to look beyond what's happened in the past and again, stay in the present moment. And by staying in the present moment, you can prepare for your future, I think.
Yeah. Moving on to the third one here. Amidst the turmoil of events, do not lose your presence of mind. And this is the counterbalance strategy. This is a big shout out to Marcus Aurelius. Mm-hmm. Your mind is weaker than your emotions.
Yeah, but at the same time, a focused mind has no room for anxiety. And today's day and age, everybody is full of stress and anxiety. And later on, it talks about when you're tired, it's because you're bored and complacent with where you're at. If you're always constantly doing something, you'll never be tired. You'll never be bored of what you're doing.
Yeah, and this has to come through practice. You have to be able to expose yourself to conflict to be able to kind of practice this fortitude of the mind, because like we're just reading about it, so it's not really being instilled in us. It's how can we carry this out on a day-to-day basis.
It's almost like you have to experience this firsthand in order to fully understand the law that Robert Greene is talking about, right? Everybody deals with different things, and how they deal with those things, everybody's different in their own aspect, but you can still learn from how other people have dealt with similar situations, I think.
Yeah. which I think like that's good. Like you need a starting foundation.
Yeah.
Like you should not making the same mistakes that someone in the past does.
No. Learn from them.
Yes, but at the same time, like you have to put yourself in situations where you're going to be exposing yourself to that conflict. Once your fears come to the surface, so you can practice that emotional resiliency.
Yeah, it's better to confront your fears because fear is the most destructive emotion.
And then I'm going to kind of take it from a different angle. He talks about developing your fingertip feel. So this is something you get, like you do so much pressure, like when the time comes, you just execute because it's gut feeling, basically. And one of the stories he kind of told here was Great Britain put Sir Hyde in charge of leading the charge on the Danish. They were going to war, and he was very careful and methodical compared to another commander, Nelson, who got the second in command, who really should have been first. And Sir Hyde was like, they were fighting for hours and seeming to make no progress. But Nelson didn't care about any of his orders and kept fighting because he knew he put in so much preparation. And after those couple of hours, the Danish eventually fell because he knew that they were weak and it was only a certain amount of time before they started to teeter off. So that's kind of like doing all that preparation, having that fingertip feel so you're ready to go when the time comes.
Ready for the death ground strategy?
Yeah, so 4 is create a sense of urgency and desperation. When you have a safety net in place, you're most likely not going to take risk, or you're going to do things in a completely different fashion. You have to be able to put yourself in a place where you're on death ground, essentially, because that's going to make you give 130%, right? Because you don't want to die, you don't want to fail.
Yeah, one of the key points that I put out was you're your own worst enemy, right? But along with that, you waste precious time dreaming of the future instead of engaging in the present. So you kind of almost have to cut ties to the past because you can't change the past, and so there's really not even any point in looking back at the past. And you know, there are always things that you wish you could change, right? But that's just unrealistic and not even possible. You can't go back and change what's happened in the past. You can only focus on what's going on right now. And I think for me especially, I've got a very, very hard time staying in the moment, right? And that's one thing I want to implement in my future is just I have to realize what I have right in front of me rather than what I want to achieve or what I've messed up in the past. Because ultimately, neither one of those things really matter if I don't know what's right in front of me at that very moment.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
Because I'm always constantly thinking about, what do I want in my future when I can't even stay focused on what I have right in front of me, you know? Because I'm too worried about what's happened in the past, where I've messed up in the past. And you just kind of get in that spiral cycle where you're just going down, and the only person that can pull you out of that cycle is yourself. And this book really helped me open up my eyes and realize, dude, the past happened, okay? Say it's like a rope. You just got to cut the rope and let that thing fall because it's not going to change.
Doesn't matter.
No, you just got to realize that at some point or the other. And if you don't, you're always going to be worried about things that you ultimately cannot control at all.
Yeah. So my last point here before we move on is, in general, society keeps death so far removed. Like, people take time for granted, essentially.
Yeah.
So that kind of plays into your point about staying in the present. Like, your days are numbered.
Mm-hmm.
What you do on a day-to-day basis, you have to do with a sense of urgency because you have no idea. So how can you be constantly living in the present moment?
There are two things that you'll never get back: time and energy, and you have to use those two resources preciously, I would say.
Yeah, and like one of the stories was someone in Russia was writing, and the Russian government gave him a death sentence for trying to go against the crux of what the Russians were for. So the government like at the last second changed their mind and was like, we're just going to sentence you to a couple years of life or a couple years in prison. And this completely changed his framework on how he viewed his life, because at 1 second, in a couple minutes, he was going to be dead. He was going to have no more life. But then he got that second chance, so he took every moment from there on out and used it to its max potential. Anything else to add there? Moving on to part 2, organizational or team warfare. And the first strategy here is avoid the snare of groupthink, which is the command and control strategy. Success is determined by the style of leadership or the change in command that you create. Groups that are slow to decide ultimately are going to fail. So if you don't have that like unity of leadership where you're able to execute on decisions quickly, then that's ultimately going to lead to your demise.
Yeah, but at the same time, you need to find a compromise along all the different egos. Otherwise, it kills creativity within the group.
Yeah, it's kind of like having people. You have to hire people who are going to share your vision, but like we talked about in multipliers, give them that space to
come up
go,
with their own ideas,
to go and thrive, but ultimately be able to have quick insights into what everybody's doing, so you can help facilitate decisions quickly across groups, across different teams. Next one is segment your forces, the controlled chaos strategy. You have to be able to insert fluidity into your organizational structure or your team structure. Kind of like we said in the last one, the ability to shapeshift and meet the demands of the current environment is ultimately what's going to lead to your success.
Yeah, the critical elements of life are speed and adaptability. The quicker you make decisions, that it almost requires the person that you're going against to forget about what they prepared for and just react to what you just did. And most of the time they're reacting out of emotion, and everybody knows that when you react out of emotion, it's not necessarily the best option that you have. But you also need to put yourself in situations where you have multiple different options.
Yes, yeah, and that's like they say, place yourself in chi, which is a position of potential force, which gives yourself options. And Napoleon was fantastic at this. He was able to deceive the enemy by breaking a whole bunch of his army into different little groups, and he was able to move with speed and precision that threw his armies off guard, which was huge because it just gave him so much more options that he could take in and adapt to the current circumstances. Moving on to the next one here, transform your war into a crusade, moral strategies. So a couple of these to create the best group dynamic and present destructive morale. You need to be able to unite your troops around a cause.
They need a leader, and sometimes you have to be the person who's leading. You have to be in the front and let other people take notice of what you're doing, and that kind of sparks energy out of the group, and you'll be able to achieve more.
Yeah. On top of that, you have to make sure that their needs are met. You can't be giving them a lack of resources to live their life, essentially, have their basic needs. And you also have to play to their emotions. We're all emotional creatures. So if you're able to pull the strings in the right way, I think you can get a lot working in your favor.
Controlled chaos.
Yeah. And another thing too, kind of like we talked about in multipliers, start with easy battles that you can win. Give them some confidence before conquering bigger and bigger items.
Because the little wins compound over time, and that increases the momentum you have in order to prepare for the situation that you're going to be dealing with.
Yeah, and kind of two key figures here in this chapter were Lyndon Johnson. He had a knack for recruiting the best people and getting the most out of them, but he was always putting in the most work. So he led from the front. Like whenever someone would come in the office, he was already there working. So he demanded a lot from his team, but he also exerted himself a lot too. He led from the front.
Yeah, don't be afraid to work behind the scenes as well, right? And just because, at the same time, don't expect anything out of that, right? don't get your hopes up that like, oh, I'm putting so much time and effort into this, but I'm not getting anything out of it. It'll all work out, and just have faith in the fact that the more hard work and effort that you put into something, the more you're going to be able to get out of that thing.
Yeah. And the morale you insert in your team is contagious, and you as a leader set that tone. Sacrifices are requested in anything that you do, so you must be willing to make them.
Yeah. Part 3.
Part 3, defensive warfare. The first one is to pick your battles carefully, and this is the perfect economy strategy. So I'll start out with a story here. So Pyrrhus was sent out to help another city against the Romans, and the city promised him more troops. So he took an army, and when he got there, they were like, sorry, we can't give you any. And he was a great military general. So he was like, okay, I'm here. I'm still going to try to attack and defeat the Romans. So he had he was winning the battles, but the Romans were huge. Like, they had endless numbers of people. So even though he was winning, he was slowly getting decimated. And it was kind of like the sunk cost fallacy, where he couldn't just up and leave because he was already committed. So that's where you get your Pyrrhic victories, which is having excitement about a venture's prospects before it begins. Like, the end goal is enticing, like conquering the Romans. And we unconsciously see what we want to see. We see those gains, we see the fame, we see the glory, we see the success. And the farther you go into that, the harder it is to pull out.
Yeah, ground yourself not in dreams and plans, but in reality. It's important to stay in the present moment. But at the same time, you also need to know your limits. Know what you're capable of, and know what your team is capable of. If you're just setting them up to fail, that's not really good for anybody.
Yeah, it's like knowing when to stop. So
yeah.
Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier fought like 3 times, and they were both great boxers, and they went the full length every time. But the amount of strain that they put on their bodies for that
wasn't worth it.
Wasn't worth it. In terms of, like, they severely limited their longevity of their career because the goal to be the best boxer in the world, like, got a hold of them.
Yeah.
The other kind of side point I would say is, in terms of picking your battles strategically, Queen Elizabeth I, Spain wanted to conquer England, and because they wanted to get rid of the British who were taking up Protestantism, and they wanted to instill Catholicism back to England. The Spanish were running into financial troubles, so instead of going head to head with them, they cut off all of their, I'm gonna say, like, satellite states who were giving them all their resources, and ultimately decimated their economy, which delayed the funding it took for the war, which ultimately completely deterred the Spanish from attacking them. So they didn't have to face off in a war. So by not choosing to directly engage, they were able to kind of pick that battle and win it strategically.
Number 9 is turn the tables, counterattack strategy, right? For me, one of the biggest key things that I pulled out was you have to learn to be patient and learn when is the right moment to quote unquote attack, and when is not the right moment to do that.
Yeah, Robert Greene called it the Napoleonic way. At times you seem vulnerable and defensive, and getting your opponents to disregard you as a threat, to lower the guard. That's the moment when the time is right and you sense an opening, and then you switch to attack mode. It's kind of like jujitsu in your everyday lifestyle. Let events come to you and save your time and your energy for those brief moments where you can blaze in with the counterattack and kind of surprise them.
Yeah. The first step to mastering the counterattack is to master yourself, and patience is critical for a clear mind.
Yeah, and I'm good to move on. The next one here is to create a threatening presence, the deterrence strategies. So you kind of gotta take a reverse intimidation approach, people are more likely to attack you if they see you as weak. So how can you put on a front and
you have to build up that reputation
yeah,
as powerful and commanding. Otherwise, people are just going to try to walk all over you all the time.
yeah, because they're after those quick and easy victories.
Yeah.
So if you can throw them false signs of your strength while you're building up that
army,
that army
confidence. You need confidence.
Yeah, so a couple methods of deterrence that you can utilize are surprise with bold, fast maneuvers, reverse the threat, threaten something they value, inflict some pain essentially, seem unpredictable and irrational, indicate that you have nothing to lose. When people see that, they kind of stay away because
that scares people.
They don't want to go down with you and lose everything. Play on people's paranoia. People are, again, we're emotional beings, so the ability to influence that mindset is huge. And then just establish a frightening reputation. Next one is trade space for time, the non-engagement strategy. The idea of action through inaction, the belief that by reacting and fighting against circumstances, by constantly struggling in life, you actually move backward, creating difficulties in your path. So, like, advancing is not always good.
No.
You have to be able to analyze when the time is right to retreat, to know when to recruit, to gain that.
And sometimes retreating is the best thing you can do, because if you overplay your hand, that makes you vulnerable to other people's attacks and strategies. So you have to realize that time loss can never be regained, and so it's important to realize when you've lost, essentially.
Yeah, okay, and creating that time allows for Murphy's Law to come in to action. Like, so if you're retreating and your enemy's pursuing, and I guess a quick aside too is, I know we're talking about like a lot of these like war strategies, but hopefully
there's a deeper meaning behind the war, all the war talk, and it's kind of hard to convey that message. But
like on an individual life basis.
Yeah.
But anyways, back to like creating that time will allow for Murphy's Law, which says that anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So in that time you're retreating, you're recovering, it has time for that enemy or that other potential business for something to go wrong.
Yeah. You ready for part 4?
Yep.
The grand strategy, offensive warfare.
So the first one here is lose battles but win the war. That's Chris said grand strategy. The art of the grand strategy is looking beyond the current moment, beyond your immediate battles and concerns, and concentrate on what you want to achieve down the line. Thinking in terms of the overall campaign, not the individual battles that you're facing.
Yeah, you have to be able to use your tools more effectively.
And this is what Chris and I were talking about before it started. Like, it's so hard to do this, to be able to separate yourself from like everyday life and be able to see that grand vision in terms of like your career path, a huge project at work, seeing that end goal and how to get there. It's an art that definitely is going to take time to develop.
It's not something you can just pick up right away, for sure.
So during the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese actually used this grand strategy. They knew they could never defeat the Americans because America is the military powerhouse of the world. So how did they eventually kind of, I'm going to say, win the war, kind of?
It's controversial.
Yeah, they played on the American people. Yeah. They knew that support for the war is ultimately what's going to keep it going. Yeah, so like the Americans weren't making any progress at all. And they, back home in the United States, they said that they were going to, like, the war was going to be over soon. But then they started showing there's evidence that they're not even anywhere close. So this dissuaded the American public, which ultimately made the Americans pull out of
the Vietnamese War.
Yeah, the Vietnamese War, which was all created by that grand strategy from the Vietnamese people.
Yep.
So it's like being able to stand on the mountaintop and overlook the entire battlefield. Because when you're in the midst of it, there's smoke, there's confusion, there's chaos. But being able to stand up on that mountaintop and just see an overview
And reflect.
Is huge.
Yeah. Moving on to number 13, know your enemy, the intelligence strategy.
Yeah.
You can. One of the points that I put out was you can really tell who someone is in a time of crisis, and because this is when they're almost at their weakness. They've got no fortress around them, and later on it talks about, people who have a fortress built around them. Most of the time, it's because they feel like they have no other options, right? They feel like the only option they have to protect themselves and protect their peace of mind is to build up a wall that's that you can't get over or you can't get through. So.
Yeah, so he was kind of talking about like how can you infiltrate that?
Yeah.
So, back in the Napoleonic times, Metternich, who is a part of the Austrian Empire, became close friends with Napoleon, who was running things in France, and he even offered him like one of the grandest gestures at the time was he gave him his sister to be kind of inducted into the Austrian dynasty. And Napoleon began to open up, and then he was able to see all of his flaws, know all of his plans, which ultimately led to Napoleon's defeat down the line. So it's how can you really get inside your opponent's mind? Because everybody struggles to conceal what's struggling in their mind. They unconsciously want to reveal themselves. So you kind of have to look for this in everyday life, and it says like people really tell you a lot, like even from their eyes. So how can you utilize that on a daily basis? Anything else to add there? Moving on to strategy 14, overwhelm resistance with speed and suddenness, the Blitzkrieg strategy. Something here was the slow, quick strategy. So before any big campaign, any big war, you have to prepare. And then the second slow was kind of a setup. Let the enemy have a quick, easy win. So then they're going to be, this is going to be easy. Then as soon as they start let their guard down,
that's when the quick comes in.
Yeah, that's when the quick comes in. So you just got to hit them from the side in something that they're unexpecting, and they're going to fall pretty quickly.
Yeah, the key to this is velocity creates a sense of vitality, right? And speed is your friend. You need to be able to use it to your advantage. Like we mentioned earlier, you have to be able to come up with decisions quickly, because this makes that your opponent react out of emotion rather than how they prepared for that situation.
Yeah,
people keep them off balance.
People want to slow things down too.
Yeah.
So when like in modern day life, because the pace is ever increasing, especially as you grow older, and people just want to slow down, so they kind of retreat and become complacent, I guess. And this is where the Blitzkrieg strategy, the sudden and decisive action comes into play. Like how can you, as an individual, keep that suddenness and decisiveness going?
Yeah. Keeps people on their toes.
Yeah.
And you can never react properly when you're always on the defensive side of things.
Moving on to strategy 15 here, control the dynamic, forcing strategies. 4 basic principles of the art of ultimate control. First is keep them on their heels. Make your own opportunities is essentially what that's saying. Shift the battlefield. Always fight on your ground that is unfamiliar with the enemy. You know what you know best.
Yeah, move with purpose and direction, and you can control all your situations. But control is an issue in all relationships. People are always constantly fighting for control in different situations. But if you're able to play on your own terms and your own, and being able to prepare your moves, you'll be able to control the situation.
Yeah, that's what kind of the 4th one says here. Assume passive control. Make people believe that they're in control, that they're influencing all the decisions while you're really behind the scenes controlling those levers. And the last one here is to compel mistakes. their missteps give you the ultimate control. Be able to analyze and see them when they make those mistakes so you can capitalize.
16, hit them where it hurts, the center of gravity strategy.
Carthaginian Empire was in North Africa and was led by the great military leader Hannibal. So he was conquering a whole bunch of he was going all over Europe and was eventually targeting Rome. So the Roman general Scipio decided to not take him head on. So the first thing he did was attack New Carthage, which was the Carthaginian base in Europe. So that cut off.
Why did he attack it?
It cut off all of Hannibal's supplies.
Because that was where the strength lied. Okay.
And then instead of then pursuing them, he then went to Africa and started burning his camps, essentially. So then he had a straight march on the capital, but he decided to go off and burn all of their resources, all of their food. So then by the time that Hannibal's army came back to them in Africa, they were already decimated. So it's kind of like all their pillars of strength, they were able to chop those down one by one. That ultimately made the whole building or the whole structure fall. Yeah, do not focus on the enemy's punches that they're throwing. Focus on what holds them up.
Yeah, understanding what their strengths are, and you can kind of target their strengths, and then take advantage of them one-on-one. Ready for
last
17?
one here? Yeah. Strategy 17, defeat them in detail, divide and conquer strategy. When a powerful foe attacks you in strength, threatening your ability to advance and take the initiative, you must work to make the enemy divide its forces and then defeat them smaller forces one by one.
Division is weakness, right? You have strength in numbers, and when the forces are divided, there's a weakness.
Yeah, so another story here is the Persian Empire was attacking the Athenians, and they outnumbered them drastically, and they were all about to advance on one side, but they decided to split their forces and take half their army and ships around the other side to kind of scrunch them in the middle. So the Athenians saw that and attacked the ones that remained right away, quickly won, ran to the other side of the country, and was able to fend off the other side. So because they were able to, once the Persians split and divided, they were able to capitalize on that and defeat them.
Yep. They were toast. They didn't have a chance.
Yeah, the Athenians would have been completely crushed if the Persians just
stayed together.
Yeah.
Strength in numbers.
Anything else to add on the 17 strategies that we discussed so far?
No, I think we're tried our best.
Sweet. We're not going to do any implementation or quotes for
this episode.
And we will cover the remaining 16 in the next one.
Yep.
We just want to thank you guys all for tuning into this episode.
Yeah, we're on Instagram and TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast at Balance and Improve. Thanks for tuning in.
We'll see you next week.